Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to take part on the forum which is connected to such important issues like hybrid warfare today. First of all, I appreciate all of you for your support of our country in our struggle against the world evil, against Russian Federation and Belarus. Also, I am very glad to see my colleagues from our project. I appreciate all of you, especially Neil Chuka, also the head of the NATO Science and Technology Organization, and of course Gordon Akrab, for your support and help. Ukraine became the object of military aggression by Russian Federation, which became the realization of the final phase of hybrid aggression. This aggression has been carried out without stopping all the time since the independence of Ukraine. Economic blackmail, gas wars, the Budapest Memorandum, internal destabilization, the fifth column in Russia and Russian citizens in the Ukrainian government, the Russian church in Ukraine, the distribution of pro-Russian content in the information field of Ukraine, etc. All of these events were elements of Russian soft power against Ukraine, which created favorable conditions for the final blow by the so-called Second Army of the World. Today is the 226 days of our war against Russian barbarians. My colleagues in the previous panel shared the Ukrainian Army and Navy experiences in countering Russian aggressions. My presentation describes the results of the SAS 161 international project, military aspects of countering hybrid warfare, experiences, lessons, best practices, which was launched by the NATO Science and Technology Organization under the framework of NATO-Ukraine platform on countering hybrid warfare 3 years ago. Based on this activity, I would like to share with you Ukrainian results of this project, which were completed before the large-scale invasion of the Russian troops on the territory of Ukraine, and to compare with the current situation. I would like to present to you a monograph, Military Aspects of Countering Hybrid Aggression in Ukraine Experience, prepared by an authoring team of the National Defense University of Ukraine during 2019-2020 in the framework of the Kalmius research work. The monograph addresses various aspects of a hybrid aggression concept, summarizes current views on counteracting scenarios and the use of military and non-military tools in the integrated joint forces operation, provides appropriate methodological and practical guidelines for countering hybrid threats. Also, last year I added 2 materials about the informational aspects of hybrid warfare and organizing the territorial defense of it. The monograph and these materials were translated and edited by the help of Neil Chuka, the head of our project. You can find them in our SAS page. Let me briefly dwell on the Ukrainian main research results. At the geopolitical level, the conflict in Ukraine was caused by Russian foreign policy reversal towards competitive confrontation with the West and restoration of Russia's imperial essence. At the regional and military strategic level, the causes of the conflict were Russia's restoration of its dominance within the USSR's territorial boundaries and further expansion of its influence on the territory of the former Warsaw Pact, as well as a threat to Russia and access to the Middle East. Each conflict has its own features and peculiarities, but the conflict which has been taking part on Ukrainian territory has demonstrated a qualitative leap in forms, methods, and procedures of using state resources to achieve political objectives. Russian Federation preferred the use of military, informational, and psychological, as well as economic and political resources. Actions that can be classified as armed aggression were carried out only by the Russian Federation. Before the 24th of February, such actions were temporary occupation of the Ukrainian Autonomic Republic of Crimea, sending armed groups of regular and irregular forces to Ukrainian territory, fire support of combat actions of illegal armed groups in eastern Ukraine from units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, blocking Ukrainian ships traveling to ports on the Azov coast. According to Ukrainian legislation, the actions of the Russian Federation fall under the definition of the armed aggression. From the perspective of the large-scale use of military force, Ukraine's accession to NATO, coercive return of the Autonomic Republic of Crimea, and coercive restoration of control over the occupied territories are unacceptable to Russia, as well as now, by the way. Russian leaders had formed a second echelon of intervention on the border with Russia and Belarus, and in the temporary occupation Crimea, the Russian military command had deployed a more than 100,000 strong group of carrier servicemen which outnumbered the occupying forces in terms of combat readiness. I would like to emphasize that it was written in the year 2020. Threats of a military and hybrid nature formed not by purely military, but rather non-military factors require equally comprehensive response. It should be noted that countering hybrid threats is a complex process due to a large number of different factors shaping these threats and difficulties and methods of integration of military and non-military forces and means of counteraction. We have proposed the conceptual model of managing the integrated countermeasures potential. It gives an opportunity to substantiate a rational composition of forces and means for de-escalation of the identified threats and assess real possibilities for neutralization of specific military threats and threats with signs of hybridity. It also evaluates the effectiveness of the use of forces and means of individual Ukrainian security and defense sector components integrated to counter the threat. One of the main conclusions from Russia's hybrid war against Ukraine is that the role of its information component has multiplied. In a resource-limited setting, the state should use all possible forms of attracting non-government actors through public-private partnership and liaison with civil society structure and individual citizens to effectively support cyber defense. One of the state's main tasks on ensuring information security of the Ministry of Defense and the Ukrainian armed forces is to arrange and perform counteraction to the adverse information and psychological impacts on the Ukrainian armed forces personnel. This initiates establishment of an appropriate system. Strategic communication mechanism is the most important element of ensuring state information security and counteraction the hybrid aggression against Ukraine. Strategic communication should be considered as activity which is coordinated at the strategic, military, political, governance level and aimed at managing decision-making processes both within the country, group of countries, and abroad to defeat the enemy. A high-mobility internal communications groups project has been implemented with support of the United States and Ukrainian partners as part of implementation of a strategic communications concept in the Ukrainian armed forces to introduce new technologies of internal communications in joint forces units. The goal of the group was to establish communication within military units, in particular between units and brigade headquarters. The tasks accomplished by the high mobility groups allowed creating an effective system of internal communications between commanders and personnel to maintain and restore moral and psychological condition of units and their psychological readiness to perform combat tasks. Particularly effective element of the work was the organization of constant feedback with the staffs and units and obtaining objective information by the leadership of the armed forces of Ukraine. Identification and prompt resolution of problematic issues that negatively affect the moral and psychological condition of personnel. The organization of interaction between the armed forces of Ukraine and the civilian environment, governmental and non-governmental, in the areas of deployment of military units or in the areas of deployment to perform assigned tasks is an urgent task that relies on civil-military cooperation. An important component of the Joint Forces activity was the humanitarian initiative of the Joint Forces Command Help East, a multidisciplinary program of targeted actions to help civilians. CIMIC servicemen work both in the gray zone and along the line of contact. In addition, CIMIC groups are making considerable efforts to release Ukrainian servicemen from captivity. The priorities of the Joint Forces Organization in the humanitarian sphere are protection of the civilian population, creation of conditions for sustainable social and economic development of the region, building the capacity of the CIMIC forces with the Joint Forces Command and state and local authorities, cooperation with international humanitarian organizations. The groups of the Central Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine are tasked with coordinating the activities of public authorities, international humanitarian organizations in the field of mine safety, delivery of humanitarian goods, restoration of critical infrastructure, electricity, gas, water supply systems, housing repair. There is a need to deepen the dialogue on the use of existing methods of providing United Nations military assistance based on acts of international law due to full-scale war between the Russian Federation against Ukraine. The choice by the military political leadership of the state of an appropriate strategy for settling the conflict is impossible without taking into account the behavior of the other side of the conflict and the nature of the assistance provided to it. Such assistance can be provided simultaneously in many areas of existing conflict: political, economic, and financial support, supply of weapons and equipment, training, etc. The experience of conflict resolution in Eastern Ukraine has shown that Russia's Federation's support to the self-proclaimed republic is comprehensive and increases or decreases in areas that correspond to the overall strategy of creating a certain environment of influence on Ukraine's leadership. Cooperation with NATO in the framework of security force assistance is a promising area of foreign military assistance to counter hybrid threats, as this area of the alliance's activities is aimed directly at strengthening the security and defense capabilities of partner countries, which NATO is now in Ukraine. Analysis of the informational field around Ukraine made it possible to predict scenarios for the development of a military conflict with the Russian Federation. The selected complex factors made it possible to obtain one baseline and four derivative scenarios of the situation, namely slow movement, independence, balancing on the rope, little Russia, Russian peace. The assessment of possible scenarios showed that there would be some combined variant in reality with the separate features of the proposed scenarios. The probability of future events in each scenario was approximately the same and depended on the local election in Ukraine, presidential and parliamentary election, etc. However, the probability of large-scale armed conflict between Russian Federation and Ukraine was very high under the scenario balancing on the rope. The best course of events in Ukraine was based on the independence scenario. Thus, the situation circa 2019-2020 contained preconditions for several variants of the possible political situation around Ukraine under armed aggression by the Russian Federation. However, in the coming years, this future would be limited by two key constants: large-scale armed aggression by Russian Federation and the final settlement of the political situation between Ukraine and Russian Federation. On the eve of invasion by the armed forces of Russian Federation, the question of Ukrainian territorial defense against hybrid threats remained acute. Historical experience shows that territorial defense is one of the most difficult aspects of warfare. Much depends on the strength of enemy's military potential and an in-depth analysis of their methods of military action, but consideration must also be given to the domestic political situation. Formation of a modern system of territorial defense integrated into the general defense system of the state and under the leadership of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. This should be able to successfully maintain martial law, whilst also organizing the reliable protection and defense of critical state infrastructure, especially military. Summarizing the above, it should be noted: Russian Federation's policy on the world stage is systematic and coordinated. The Kremlin uses a wide arsenal of means of hybrid aggression to implement tactical tasks, among which we can single out the massive offensive propaganda of powerful Russian foreign broadcasting, Russia Today, Sputnik, etc., which is an effective information weapon, a powerful unit of real information products, and a means of targeted promotion of Russian ideology and the concept of Russian world. The events of 2014-2021 for Ukraine became a vital test of resistance to hybrid aggression. The effectiveness of countering hybrid threats can be achieved, first of all, by introducing adequate and mutually agreed actions not only in the military sphere but also in other spheres of national security. The phrase "we are from Ukraine" has deepened context now, because Ukraine is in the foremost of eastern boundaries of European civilization to counteract the Russian barbarian invasion. Dear colleagues, my presentation is over.